So we're going to get started into our study of the book of Revelation, and we began the introduction of the Antichrist last week, chapter 13, verse 2, and we're still there, really, and might even be there again next week, I don't know, but because there's just so much that's revealed here in just a couple of verses that covers so many other passages in Scripture. So, John, just to recount of what we had covered a little bit last week, John said, I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. He had 10 horns, 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. So, we ended our discussion last week talking about just how does the Antichrist come to be? How does he happen? And we looked at it, and basically this is a human being. This is a man born with a sin nature, but whether through circumstances in his life or just his own soul decision-making process, he offers himself and becomes open to devil possession. Not demon possession, but devil possession. And we have instances in Scripture where this has happened. Judas was possessed by Satan, and for no other reason than in his rejection of Christ, he loved money. So that sinfulness opened up a door for him to go to a level that no one else has ever gone to as far as being devil possessed. We don't know of anyone else in Scripture that I can recall off the top of my head that has ever been devil possessed. Demons, yes. Devil, no. Judas is the first, if you will, but Antichrist will be the second and thankfully the last that will be possessed that we know of from Scripture. But in thinking about, what type of individual is this? What are the pictures that are given to us in Scripture of Antichrist? And we get the most detail from the book of Daniel. And all these passages are from the book of Daniel. I mentioned about reading chapters 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 11 of Daniel in particular. And the reason I said that is because we're going to be looking at those passages. But in all of those, sometimes multiple verses touch on the same thing, that we see some of the characteristics, some of the pictures. Certainly not all of the pictures, but we get an idea of just what this individual is going to be and how he's going to, act. And I call these shadows of types because the things that are described here were never called Antichrist, but they symbolize the man that in Revelation 13, and I just didn't have room to put all the verses in Revelation. I will touch on those as we go through these. But it's interesting. And just looking through these, and if you can't read some of this chicken scratch up here, just let me know and I'll translate it for you, because I'm sure sitting back there, it just really looks all jumbled together in some form. But these are shadows, these are types, these are things that represent the ultimate fulfillment, which is the man in chapter 13 of the book of Revelation. So we have from Daniel, and this is going to skip around, so if you want to turn there, look at it. We're going to visit these chapters again if we get to them today. But he has a small beginning. In other words, he's going to come up as a relatively unknown individual. In the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verses 8, and chapter 8, verse 9, he's referred to as a small horn, another horn that is rising. And he has a small beginning. So he's, if he's living today, we don't know that that's who it is. He could be alive today on earth. We don't know. If he is, there's people we could point to, but nobody knows. He has a small beginning. You could say even a slow start. And if there's something that piqued your interest or whatever you want to ask the question, please, don't hesitate. But he's also a man of pride and swagger. We hear a lot about swagger in our day. And chapter 7, verse 20, chapter 8, verse 23, verse 25, chapter 11, verse 36 talks about the pride, talks about the abilities that this man has, the vanity that will make him, which may very well be part of what leads him to this league with the devil himself. But he's also a man of ability. Antichrist doesn't, as he is growing, as he is arising in the world, he may very well look for the longest time as somebody we would vote for at the next election. We want him because he's a man of ability. Yeah, it don't take much. I mean, I said this before the last election, that I think both parties were missing the point that the American people are just simply tired of the junk that is happening in Congress. I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. That's irrelevant. There was just so much junk and mess that the average American was just simply tired of that. And we'll vote for anybody that will, in our minds, do something about that. And I said, if Trump had not been elected, who might would have run in 2020 that we would have said, oh yeah, we'll vote for him. They didn't elect Trump, well, we're going to vote for this guy. We've all said something to that, along that line. He's going to be a man of ability. Chapter 7, verse 20, chapter 8, verse 24, 25, chapter 11, verse 36. He is a man that has the answer to what people are needing and feeling. He's also going to be, in that light, a political force. Now, whether he's a politician or whether he's a businessman, I tend to lean toward the idea of him being a businessman who influences politics. It's just kind of the way that I see this. Not necessarily so, but either way, whether he's a politician or whether he's a person that is in corporate, international corporations, business, so forth, he is going to exert a political force. This is very clear. Chapter 7, verse 24, this is all from Daniel. Chapter 8, verse 23, chapter 9, verse 27, chapter 11, verse 36. In these passages, he is the one who is going to dethrone. He's going to uproot 3 of the horns, 3 of the last 10 nations. He's going to depose them. He's the one who's going to form the covenant with the Jews. So he is a political force. He has the ability, he has the force, he is able to manage politics because he's in league with the person who's controlling all the politics. He promotes worldly deceit. Through him, deceit will prosper or craft will grow, depending upon which translation of the Bible that you have, King James New International Version, chapter 8, verse 25. He's going to be a very slick individual. He will exhibit unnatural power. Chapter 7, verse 24, chapter 8, verse 24, chapter 11, verse 39. His power is going to seem to the world, and they're going to fall in line with this, that there is some other force that he's connected with. Revelation chapter 13 tells us that people of the earth will worship the dragon as well as the Antichrist, the force behind the Antichrist. He's going to reflect the empires of old. We're going to talk more about this. Chapters 2, chapter 7, chapter 8 of Revelation touch on that. We're going to talk some more about that. He's going to promote himself as Messiah because he's going to form a covenant with the Jews. He's going to exercise spiritual deception. Chapter 7, verse 25. Chapter 11, verse 36. He's going to give voice to the rejection of God. He's going to be the one who's going to have the audacity and the brass to say what people of earth are thinking. He's going to give voice to that. And that's going to help promote him as that political force. He's going to destroy the saints. I'm going to talk some more about that. But it's interesting that one of the characteristics of Antichrist is that, and the scripture is very plain, he is going to persecute and destroy. He's going to conquer the saints during the tribulation period. He is time limited. Now, to destroy the saints, chapter 8, verse 24, chapter 11, verse 26. He's time limited. Chapter 7, verse 25, chapter 12, verse 7 of Daniel. Both of those passages, as well as what is said here in the book of Revelation, let us know that, his reign is not indefinite. The last 3.5 years is where we are now in the book of Revelation. It's time limited. And he will be defeated by God. Chapter 2, verse 44, chapter 7, verse 22, verse 26, 27, chapter 8, verse 25. And you can add the first part of chapter 12 into this as well. He's defeated by God. So, these are the things that will make up this individual. Comments? Anything that stood out to you as maybe you looked at some of these, or if you've looked at these passages that stood out to you? Okay. So, when you think about the elections to come, and as I've often said, God is not a politician. His form of government is theocratic. He's not Republican, Democrat, independent, conservative, liberal. You can't put any of those designations on the Lord. His favorite form of government is theocratic. It's theocracy. And he will set that up in the millennium. But when you think about elections, especially as time goes on, the major elections in our nation and what happens around the world, keep these in mind. We don't know where he's coming from. I'm assuming he's going to be a Jew. But that doesn't mean he's got to come out of Israel. Possibly, but not necessarily. But these are going to be some of the things that will be characteristic.
So, kind of back, I guess, last week, focus was on the four beasts.
Yeah.
Particularly the fourth beast.
Yes.
The one yet to come, the world, the one that's going to be the world power.
Right.
And I was doing a lot of reading over the week, and with Daniel 7, 4, and Revelation 13. And your focus is on the leader of that government. And I was looking, I guess, more at the government part of it, the beast part of it, because the first three beasts were kingdoms run by those kings,
Yeah.
or whatever. And pretty much can tell who those three were.
Yeah.
And then the speculation as to who the fourth beast was,
Yeah.
whether it's Rome or whether it's
Yeah.
Syria.
Probably Rome.
Probably Rome or whether it's Syria or something. But when I was looking at this, I guess the Holy Spirit was kind of leading me on the focus of the world government that's anti-Christ. And I couldn't help but look at perfect analogy of how anti-Christ or anti-Christian the world has become is you got a man who takes a knee. You got two football players. One man takes a knee for his belief. He's ridiculed out of society, basically, almost. You got another man who takes a knee who's become the spokesperson for Nike. One, Christ, ridiculed. The other one takes a stand for oppression or whatever, and he's been made into this
Icon.
idol, I guess you
He's
could
an
say.
icon. He's a
And so
representation.
that shows me just where we are in the scripture and in prophecy of how even our country,
Yeah.
founded on religious beliefs, has become
Supposedly,
so
yes.
so anti-Christian
Yeah.
and so anti-Christ that, man, society is, I mean, it's, we're living and seeing it.
This is one of the things, he gives voice to the rejection of God. If we ever have someone that, as part of their political platform, let's just say, that, yes, I am an atheist, yes, I believe in science, yes, I believe in education, yes, I believe in technology, no, I don't believe in any of this foolish myth of religion, he'll get
All
elected.
you gotta do is go to any college campus today and you're gonna hear that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
Yeah.
what's going on. I mean,
yeah,
that's.
yeah,
and
he's
it's
going to
very
raise it up.
vocal, and it's very out there, and it's nothing, no secrets kept back. I mean, that's the.
When I went to college, he was starving, but there was enough Christians to shut him up, but now there's not.
Yeah, yeah, it's very, very much what, the whole idea that God is dead came out of, what was it, Emory University? Out of a university. The whole concept of giving voice to the fact that God is dead. We've moved on from God.
That's why we need to be teaching our kids apologetics.
What's interesting thing I noticed, if you think about it, it's a generational thing. Each generation comes just a little bit more waned away from it. And so their kids are getting a little less from their parents each generation. And it's, over time, what we thought would never happen, it's happening without us even recognizing it in some ways.
Yeah.
And Kelly, don't you think it's even exponentially faster?
Oh, it's speeding
It's
up.
exponentially
Speeding up
faster
because the
now.
amount of people are growing.
Yeah, one of the things that Ray Kurzweil talks about in his book is that, has everybody got these that's going to get them? Going once, going twice, don't. That he talks about technology in particular, is what he's talking about. But he often notes this, that time and inventions and technological advance often looks to be linear. We have this thing that's been invented, this is started, this is doing. He said at some point we reach in what he calls the knee, or he calls the elbow, either one. He calls it the knee. And he said at that point, all of the stuff that has been put together over the years is able to be brought into more united focus, and all of a sudden, the changes that take place go straight up. And that's what he is saying is happening now with technology. It used to be that technology is doubling, what, every 10 years? It's almost not every 6 months. Is that?
It's more, it's all 1.5 years,
1.5?
every year and a half.
So you've got what seems to have been a crawl all along, all of a sudden just takes off and goes. And yes, it is. It is happening faster and faster. It's hard to keep up with all the changes. It's hard to keep up with everything that is happening in the world, which is another argument that we need machines that can do it faster and better. They can keep up. See how that circular reasoning goes. But he talks about this, and we can see it in the explosion of technology that's happening around the world.
We've had customers come in the last 2 weeks, just late on their power bill, but you're paying $5 a month for the phone, and they ain't like that. We gotta have a phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Billy,
Yes.
my aunt is a psychologist, and she and I were actually just talking about this just the other day, and Tate and I were talking about this on the way here this morning.
Yeah.
She's telling me for the first time in basically history, humans as a whole have begun a regression. How
The
does
less
that
you
work?
have to think yourself, the more easily it is to be led to think whatever is leading you
Right.
wants you to think.
I mean, we don't, I mean, how many of us still really even write checks a whole lot? I mean,
Yeah.
some, but you know how easy it is, life is now, but at the same time, look at how much more depression, look at the emotional immaturity, look at where it turns, and it's technology happens to coincide, it's hard not to draw a
Yeah.
correlation.
You have advertisements on television. I saw one from the Nissan Rogue where it's got that in-lane assist. You push a button, it tells you if you're veering in your lane. If I had a car that had that, I wouldn't use it.
But I mean, it's
But I don't
basic
want
survival.
anything telling me whether I'm veering in my lane or not. If I don't even have enough sense to do that, I don't need to be driving.
And if we lose some of that stuff, let's say we lost some of the technology, what would this next generation do?
Yeah.
Could they actually survive? I mean, it's a scary thought.
It is. It is. And, the emphasis, the push on more machine technology, and it's business, it's not government. That's the thing we have to realize. It's not government. It makes no difference who sits in the White House. This is happening regardless. So, as much as we look at politics as being, well, what in the world's going on? We need to look at business. Because that's where probably he's going to come from. International corporations run more of the world than politicians run. It is, so we have to be mindful of these things. And in thinking about this, most of us want to think the rapture is going to take place and we ain't going to be here. Maybe, maybe not. But we've got to realize, because if it does, and it'd be wonderful if it does happen, pre-tribulation. I don't think it will, but it'd be wonderful if it does.
Oh, it's gonna happen.
Yeah. It's going to happen. That we know. The preliminaries. We are living in the preliminaries. And of course, preachers have said this for hundreds of years. But at the rate, looking at that heel, that turn, that elbow, that knee of technological advance, this is a different time. This is a different time. We need, as Jesus said in the Gospels, watch and pray. Be aware, because there's a lot that's going to be all of a sudden gelled in place with Antichrist that is happening now. And we just need to be aware. It doesn't mean that we got to go live out on the side of a mountain somewhere, unhooked from all the technology. It doesn't mean we got to do that. It just means we need to be wise and not allowing what is happening in the world to overwhelm our spiritual relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what we have to be mindful of. Scripture, it's one of the things about Revelation, and all that it talks about, it doesn't tell you anything to do to survive during the tribulation period. You don't find anything in here. Run is basically the only thing it says.
That's what we're not gonna be here, right?
Down here, he's made it okay. Go.
But at the same time, but you have people who will be.
It depends
You
where.
have Christians who will be here. They'll get saved after the rapture if it takes place pre-tribulation. It's nothing says what they do. Why? Because everything that the gospel says about worry, trust, food, life, clothing, all of that stays in place. Revelation concentrates more on our relationship with God in the midst of all that is coming down at us, rather than telling us, okay, you need to have 6 months of food stored up. You need to have so much money in cash stored up. You need to buy gold. You need to whatever. It doesn't say any of that. Yeah.
I've been studying somebody that believes that after the tribulation, that people can't be saved because they've had the decision, and once the tribulation happens and supposedly the rapture happens and Christians are gone, that those people that are left behind cannot make that
because you have 144,000 Jewish evangelists that happen, if the rapture takes place,
But they're
pre-
Jewish.
They're still people.
Let me ask a
And
question.
you also have the passage out of Revelation chapter 5, and you have a couple other passages where every tribe, every nation, every person is singing praise to God. So you have people that will be saved during this time. In chapter 13, the beast he is given power, verse 7 of chapter 13, he was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. Okay, now you already have the Jewish people that are being protected. The woman in chapter 12, verse 14, is being protected. You have the saints that are going to be conquered. And all inhabitants whose names have not been written in the Lamb's Book of Life, verse 8, will be deceived, whose names have not been written in the Lamb's Book of Life. So that intimates you still have the possibility, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you possibly your life, because this is what it says. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints.
That's the only response given for Christians.
That's the only thing we're told to do as a believer. Even if the church is raptured pre-tribulation, for believers, Jew and Gentile alike during the tribulation, the only two things that are told to us is to have patience and faith. Otherwise, you trust God just like we have to trust Him now. And you kind of wonder, okay, I really don't trust Him now. What would I do? You don't. That leads us to that next thought in our own minds. But that's what it called for. But no, I think people will be saved all the way through the tribulation period.
So the question you ask is, if that would be the case, why are they here? If judgment's already been cast on them, and they're not going to be saved, what's the point?
Yeah.
I think it's God in His mercy giving one last chance for those people who have rejected and unbelieved and whatever. Finally, it's like, here it is. This is your last
Because
chance.
you have people that even after the millennium will reject Christ. So you have people that are saved during the millennium. But at the end of that 1,000 years, Satan is loose for a little while, Revelation chapter 20, and the world believes him again. So even with the presence of Jesus Christ on this earth, people will still reject him, because we ain't having no alien telling us how to live. We're Americans. We ain't having nobody tell us how to live.
We came once and we killed him the first time.
Yeah. And they'll try to, when he comes the second time, they'll try it again. That's what happens at the Battle of Armageddon. He's going to win. But even the third time, at the end of the millennium, they're going to try it again. And that will wrap up the deal for them. Now, it's interesting, as we look at the passage, verse 2, this beast resembles a leopard, feet like a bear, mouth like a lion. So we have, and I'm not going to try to put you through the torment of looking at my artwork, but from the book of Daniel chapter 2, we have the basic vision given of the empires leading to the Antichrist. Now, we've already talked about the Antichrist as an individual. And we're going to look at some of the background of this. In Daniel's, or Nebuchadnezzar's vision that Daniel interpreted, he told him that the head is gold, chest, arms are silver, the stomach, thighs are brass or bronze. And then the legs are iron. And that continues down till you get to the toes. And there's 10 of them And these are iron and clay. Now that's Daniel 2. That's the basic foundation for this. Now, in looking at this, Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. If you look at this, as it goes down the list, the valuableness, the quality of the metals decrease. From gold being the obvious, most expensive, and most desired, down to iron and clay, which would be the least desired. So, from Daniel chapter 2, as we look at the fact that Antichrist will be intimately involved in the purpose of all those world empires that happened before, whose goal was to impact Israel. That's the only reason that they're important in Scripture, is their impact on Israel. China was developed when Rome was reaching out across the Mediterranean. We don't hear a thing in Scripture about China, but we hear about Rome. Why? Because China didn't have nothing to do with Israel back then. This empire did. That's the only reason they're important. So in Daniel chapter 2, that's the foundation. Then you have Daniel chapter 7, and in that section of Scripture, you have a lion, then you have the leopard. I don't know if I spelled that right or not. No, you have the bear second. Yes. I thought something was wrong with that. You have the bear, you have the leopard, and then you have the beast. You know, we'll call it that because he's indescribable. He's basically that fourth empire. These correspond These all correspond. So you have, and these are characteristics. In Daniel chapter 2, the moral quality of these empires deteriorated over time. Not their power, not the extent of territory, but their level of morality, their level of relationship. You know, Nebuchadnezzar talked to Daniel about God. You don't hear a whole lot. You hear a little bit out of Cyrus when they released the Jews to come back. You don't hear anything out of Greece or Rome about relating to God. The moral quality, by the time you get down to the 10 toes, the moral quality of those 10 kingdoms will be basically atheistic. They'll be a combination of clay and iron, dirt and metal. So you have the lion is the head of gold, the bear is the silver, and this is Babylon, this is the Medo-Persian Empire, this is the Greek of Alexander, and this, in all probability, is Rome. So now in Daniel chapter 8, the only ones that are talked about are these two. Because the Medo-Persian Empire, and the Medo-Persian Empire is called a ram. There, with 2 horns. The Greeks is this one goat with one prominent horn, which is Alexander. Now you think about it, and it's interpreted, it's told to Daniel, this is Greece. This is Greece. This is 200 years at least before Alexander was probably even born. that God was laying out. Out of that, we're told in Daniel chapter 8, that after Alexander dies, his kingdom will be divided into 4 parts, and out of one of those parts, there will be a king that will arise that will become a great persecutor of the children of Israel. That was Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the ruler of the Seleucid part of that empire. And he is the one who sacrificed a pig on the golden altar. He's the one who set an image up in. He is the first, but he is an antitype. He is a precursor. He is a picture of what Antichrist will be ultimately in the tribulation period. Now, it's interesting that we have those 2 beasts, and we have a huge, supposedly, some commentators will say this, prophetic gap between the 2 legs of Rome and the feet and the 10 toes. So I don't know that it's so much a gap in this. Because let's look at verse 3. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Now, this is interesting because Revelation 13 is the only place in Scripture that this is alluded to. None of the Old Testament passages on prophecy say anything about a fatal wound and coming back to life as relative to these kingdoms. Daniel didn't say anything about it. None of the other passages of the Old Testament. This is the only place. And as such, this calls for some consideration as to exactly what is being talked about here. So when we look at this verse, we also have to look at chapter 13, verse 12, because there it is stated, talking about the false prophet, he exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And then from chapter 17, verses 9 through 11, and I'll read those to you, because you almost have to look at each word to be sure that you got it all harmonized together. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills or mountains, depends on your translation, on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, but when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7, and he is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour, or for a short period of time, will receive authority as kings along with the beast. So, harmonizing these passages is vital to get a sense as to what actually is going on. Now, the passage, and there is no passage that tells us who or what causes the death of this, because it's referred to as a fatal wound that had been healed. So, what is all this talking about? Most commentators will tell you that this wound that has been a fatal wound that is now healed is a reference for the revival of the old Roman Empire. Most every commentator will refer to that. And it is revived from the dead of passing empires. And this is primarily based upon statements made in chapter 17, verse 9, which I read to you about the 7 hills being referenced to Rome. However, the passage there in verse 10 states clearly that these 7 hills or mountains are headed by 7 kings and references what has been stated before, back in chapter 13, verse 1, and chapter 7 of Daniel, verses 19 through 20. 5 are fallen, 1 is yet to come. So this, to me, seems just to rule out the city of Rome in chapter 17. Doesn't rule Rome out, but it rules out the city. We'll get more into that when we get to 17. However, in looking at these passages, the beast had 7 heads, one of which seemed to have had a fatal wound but had been healed. The passage in chapter 17 of Revelation, verses 9 and 10, 7 heads, 5 have fallen. Remember what we talked about. In looking at the 7 heads, we have Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you have the 7th to come. So, 5 have fallen. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. 5 have fallen. 1 is Rome. 1 is yet to come. And in thinking about this, the Roman Empire, as an imperial form of government, ceased when Rome fell. And it's careful, we need to be careful to think about this because Rome is still involved in the passages, but we just got to understand how. The Roman Empire fell 476. The eastern part fell 1453. But it was the imperial, the emperor, the king that had fallen. The legacy, and you can look this up, the legacy of the Roman Empire includes the set of cultural values, religious belief, technological advancements, engineering, and language that has continued down to our very present day. To give you some examples of this, the Latin language of ancient Rome, epitomized by classical Latin, is used in Latin literature. This evolved during the Middle Ages and has been utilized ever since by the Roman Catholic Church as part of their ecclesiastical, their church Latin, the old Latin language. Vulgar Latin, or the language of the common tongue, that was used for regular social interactions has evolved into what is now called the Romance languages. Examples are Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, all of that. They are an outgrowth of the common vernacular of the language of the Roman Empire. So there is a continuance. The empire, as far as its form of government, is gone. The legacy is still around. Ancient Roman architecture has made a consistent impact on the Western world, especially during the Renaissance. Roman law, Republican politics from the age of the Roman Republic have left an enduring legacy, influencing city-states, republics of the medieval period, as well as the early United States and other modern democratic republics. The Julian calendar became the basis of the Gregorian calendar that we use today. Roman inventions and engineering, such as the construction of concrete domes, continues to influence various peoples after the fall of Rome. So to say that the Roman Empire died ignores the history of what has lived on. But the form of government is what passed away. That form of government began with Octavian Augustus, Caesar Augustus, who was on the throne when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. That form of government did die. It did pass away. So, I'm going to have to stop there. But think about your questions. Bring up next week. We'll look at them because it's complicated, but it's simple. But you've got to look at all of these in order to get it, to line up for you. Thank you.